Good evening. My name is David Okun. Welcome to my YouTube channel. I'm so grateful for everybody who helped me along this project, and thank you for subscribing. Thank you for sharing with your family and friends. Thank you for clicking notification bell, for liking, and for leaving your views. We have been talking about the cost of living across the globe, the cost of living crisis. And this time I've been linking the cost of living with the United Kingdom. United Kingdom is number one country in creating global wealth and operating global capitalism, and also leading in the financial sector, in the service sector. London is a leading city globally. It is set to replace New York, Tokyo, and all the other financial centers of the globe. So in the global economic setup, London is actually being prepared to lead in global financing. And there are worlds which will lead in the different sector of the developmental front. And this is relevant, especially Britain as a country, to look at it is relevant. Because countries like Britain affect factors such as the cost of living. The cost of living as a crisis is a feature of the economic system of capitalism. Capitalism is there to promote the market, and the market is promoting businesses, especially big businesses, which actually there to create wealth for those who have money, multimillionaires and multi-billionaires. It is by default that the majority of the population of living under this economic system are actually poor. They are poor because they work for a living. If you work for a living, the 95% or even between 90 and 95% of the population of the world working for a living are actually victims. Because if you work for somebody else, if you work self-employed as a small and medium businesses, your efforts, your enterprises, your work, your strength are there to feed into the wealth of the super rich. And therefore, the cost of living has been caused by the economic and social disparity in wealth allocation, wealth distribution. The system is actually rigged in favor of the super rich and against the poor, the lower and the middle class of society, those who work for a living and those who are working as self-employed in the small and medium sector, because they are poor and the system is actually defaulted to punish them. And I have argued in these videos, in this series, that there is a quiet operating of the system of slavery. Because if you work for a living, you actually work for nothing. The your employer actually do not work, especially rich ones, multimillionaires, multi-billionaires. They do not work. They just plan and strategize, and that is actually a redefining of work on their side, such that they are now politically, at least politically, they are being represented in the world as hard workers. And also in terms of negligence by the authorities, including the state, people who are disadvantaged by the system are being now painted actually as being lazy. Now that is a form of insult, but actually to be more precisely, it is a form of abuse. It's a very nasty behavior from the super rich and their allies in the government. And there are these kind of people who are now running the world. They have a lot of power. In my reasoning, they are the ones who need really to be educated culturally. There are, like I said in the other videos, there are two functions of progress, development and culture. Development, we are doing very well. We are creating a lot of wealth in the world. We have knowledge. We have really grown in knowledge. we have technology, and we are doing quite well. Medicine, you just name it. In terms of development, we are doing well. We are doing very poorly in measuring our cultural alertness and also our cultural proficiency, and that is a source of violence. It's created a lot of problems. It's creating a lot of problems. The war in Ukraine, for example, is an example of how poorly educated culturally we are as countries of the world. And this is something I'll be talking about over and over, so that we become aware, we create an awareness, and as we continue to experience the cost of living as a crisis, we begin also to take this opportunity to learn the way things are within our environment, in our homes, in our communities, in our society, the incidence of injustice, economic injustice, which is in itself a form of cultural and societal violence, and this is either deliberately or just a result of a failure by those who lead, those with power, those who are now controlling the global economy. And that's what I've been talking about. I've been looking at Great Britain, and if you work for a living, you need to know that you are not being paid. Because even if you're being paid very low. The amount of money you're being paid is very little, and the rest is tax. You see, it's incredible that people who are on minimum wage or who actually earn, say in Britain or America, want around $50,000 per annum should be taxed. And in take housing, for example, housing, the government should actually speak to the super rich of the world. I'm not talking about one government, one like the United Kingdom. United Kingdom, I'm using it to illustrate the idea of statehood, which has a lot of power and influence. Who is set? The state, like the UK is set to take over global leadership in terms of power, in terms of finance, in terms of hopefully. Britain will also lead us culturally, but culturally, culture means respect for humans, for humanity, valuing humanity as a priority. And you don't just value humanity, you value humanity as a matter of priority over money, over wealth, over the environment. We are part of the environment, but at the humanitarian level. Anyone who is educated culturally will do that. You value humanity comes first. So if wealthy people who are actually 10 to 5% of the global population who are culturally educated, they would have willingly, without the government actually pushing them, to give up some of their wealth willingly to provide healthcare for everyone who need healthcare. People who work for a living. Anybody who works for a living is a poor person, and naturally in our modern society they should have been helped. They need to be helped by the super rich. Take be part of your money and give it to the government. The government should set specific policies, ring fencing funding for healthcare, for actually improving employment status in these countries, whether in the developed world or in the developing world, or in the emerging economies, whatever you call them. There are people there who cannot actually afford to buy a house for their homes, and they cannot afford to buy houses for their homes. The reason they cannot afford, because they don't have the money. They have to borrow. If you have to borrow money to buy the basic necessity, it means you are actually rich, poor, and it means rich people should contribute from their wealth willingly. They don't even need to be taxed. They need to be giving in every country. Whether you are a head of state, whether you are a head of government, whether you are head of business, corporate businesses, which are people like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates, they shouldn't be doing charity. They should be setting up funny, charities. As much as we appreciate what they're doing, but we need them to be really specific, giving money specifically to buy housing. to buy houses for people who cannot afford it. If you have to borrow to buy basic necessities like housing, buy your home, especially in the developed world, but also in the developing countries. Rich people should contribute through the government to ring fence, to build houses and give it freely to every member of the global citizens. That is cultural education. That is producing evidence of cultural proficiency as members of the global community. And that is what I'm going to talk about. In every topic I address, I'm going to illustrate this fundamental element. The most important aspect of progress is actually the cultural economy, like I call it. It's a developmental economy and cultural economy. Economy in the sense that people participate to produce results, values. Work, the work produced, cultural work is actually involved in valuing people and working to produce social infrastructure, such for housing, education, healthcare, transportation, and other aspects of welfare and wellness. And that's what I've been talking about. And we can do that because all we have to do is change the way we think. And the biggest challenge facing us today is to get people to change the way they think, especially wealthy people, but also poor people. Poor people have to really begin to value themselves. You need to value your life, whether you are poor or rich. And when I talk of wealthy people, to give their money to the poor, and if they cannot, the government should have the cultural richness, the cultural fluency to tax the rich, tax them. And we have foreign offices across the globe, with government actually operating these offices. And the fundamental function is to actually promote cultural development. And in every country, every diplomat should be able to tell a member of a country to tax the poor, the rich, to give the money to the poor, to get poor people out of poverty. We are not asking for cakes, we are only asking for bread and butter. In terms of welfare, in terms of survival and survivability, we need these people to get out of poverty. And we are not there, they can find a way in the world. It is actually insufficient, disingenuous for every world government to lecture poor people who cannot even get out of poverty, lecturing them to work hard. These people are the only people who work in the world are actually poor people. And the only people who don't work, actually the super rich, people who control the economy, decontrol the economy. Every sweat, every outcome of every sweat of a poor person working, the money is taken away from the economy and given to the super rich. Super rich do not touch any work. In the conventional definition of work, they don't work. The government and the people in power may try to redefine work, the concept of work, as much as they like. But these wealthy people do not work. And it is not an offense that they do not work if they can use their leadership, their management skill to create wealth, as they have done. See, to their credit, they have created a lot of wealth, even if they didn't work for it. They use their creativity, they use their innovativeness, they use their skills, their talent to create wealth, to use poor people to work to create this wealth. In terms of raw work, it was the poor people who created wealth. But working with people who are actually creative, people who are intelligent, who are gifted with good ideas, putting this together, working with people who are actually hard workers. Because with the best of ideas, you need to put it into work. So the best of ideas was operated and it was actually commingled with hard work coming from the majority, the poor, and the super brainy ideas coming from the few. Unfortunately, because of injustice, wealth was created. Appropriately, the super rich should have taken their fair share. They were entitled to being rich because they have been leading. Unfortunately, they exercised their privileges. They took more than they should have taken, such that the rest of the majority of the population are now stuck in poverty. They need to get out of poverty immediately. And my advocacy is focusing cultural resources because I believe this can be done. It can be done beginning now. And my speaking is evidenced by our now experiencing the cost of living as a crisis. There have been all the other crises, and it is the function of the government to intervene to ameliorate circumstances arising from this crisis. And with the cost of living, we need to get housing for the homeless, the 90%, 95% of the population of the globe, because they are not able to buy housing. They increasingly now they are unable to access healthcare. They are unable to access education, transportation, transportation. We are not talking about going on holiday. We don't not even asking to go on holiday. All we need is a roof over our head, and it should cost us nothing. It should cost us nothing to acquire property which is given to people who cannot afford to buy. For people who, even if they borrow, they have to borrow and be in debt to be in housing. That should stop immediately because we have enough wealth. You can concentrate a lot of wealth in the hands of the few and still get the majority out of poverty, and this is what I am demanding in this conversation. It has to be done. This is not even peace. I'm not talking about peace. I'm talking about fairness. Some element of proportionality where poor people are still allowed to survive, to access housing, to access employment. Do not stop insulting the citizen of the world for being poor. And yet you are rude and you are so cruel. You are actually a very evil person. If you find somebody who has been working generationally, generation from generation, creating wealth for you and your family and your class of people, and you turn around and abuse people who work to get you rich, you didn't do any work. You may have had brilliant ideas, and then you enslave a group of people to get yourself rich. And it's as if being abused in slavery is not allowed. You insult them. You call them lazy. You call them scratcher. You treat people as if they were some creatures from outer space. And from my point of view, people who are cruel, who are very well going in power, are actually wicked. They are wicked because of their poor upbringing. They were poorly brought by their parents, or by their communities, by their societies, by their countries, by their world. So indirectly, we are, in one way or the other, we as the people are responsible for raising up monsters. And it is about time now to get rid of monsters or educate them. The ones who cannot be re-educated into compliance with cultural economy principle, the principle of cultural economy, which is actually respect for people, respect, valuing humanity. That is actually the principle of the cultural economy, which should be actually set on the bright light for progress, so that we begin to enjoy the fruit of this new cultural economy. This is the vehicle for peace process, peace acquisition, and peace promotion. And my invitation to invite every individual listening to this video, please subscribe to this channel if you have been listening, and share. Make sure you share with people who might or might not value this video and the messages in it. And I'm so delighted that I've been able to share what I'm saying now, because I take my life very seriously. Because if you don't value your life, you're going to be a disappointment to yourself and a disappointment to other people. And we cannot allow that to happen to ourselves and to other people, the people we care about in societies. We have to be responsible And it doesn't mean that we are not supposed to take a break and enjoy our lives. We can still work, we can still play, we can learn, we can gather information, do research, we can visit family and friends, we can do charities. But the cream of the crop is when we work hard to achieve what we need to achieve. And that is what I'm been talking about. And let us now turn from here, from this preview, to look specifically in what I set out to illustrate, to look at the United Kingdom. We have been looking at the development of the United Kingdom. The United Kingdom is composed of Great Britain and Northern Ireland. It developed historically, it continues to develop now. And if you watch this video, be sure to watch the rest of the video connected with this. The title is actually United Kingdom, and the cost of living, and they are featured, the cost of living crisis, and they feature in different parts. Thank you once more for those who have been supporting me. Continue supporting these causes within this program, and let us look at the post-20th century Britain, and also let us look at the post-war Britain between 1945 and 1979. Let us look at the social history of post-war Britain from the same period, 1945 to 1979. First of all, we're going to look at the British Empire and its territorial peak in 1921. During the Second World War, the UK was one of the big three powers, along with the US and the Soviet Union, who met to plan the post-war world. It was an original signatory to the declaration by the United Nations. This is after the war and the coming together of the big powers at that time to reschedule the progress of the globe and trying to reinstate the doctrines and also the estate of peace building and peace processing. At the war, the UK became one of the 5 permanent members of the United Nations Security Council and worked closely with the United States to establish the IMF, World Bank, and the NATO. So today we have this institution, NATO, for example, is responsible for the global security, and the IMF and the World Bank are actually responsible for financing global economies. This is actually features that form responsibilities for the development when after the war destroyed the global economy. Like I said in the other videos, the world wars, which ended actually in 1945, the first and the Second World War, respectively, they were so fundamental in destroying the globe, especially the global economy. They created their own version of the crisis, their own version of crisis, including the cost of living crisis occurred at that time because people became very, very poor. Such that the worlds came together, the state intervened. Like I'm now demanding for the state to intervene now, to intervene always, to try and address this issue. The war left the UK severely weakened and financially dependent on the Marshall Plan, but it was spared the total war that devastated Eastern Europe. Eastern Europe was devastated. It was totally, almost entirely destroyed because of the war. And this is evidence of cultural failure as an economy, as part of progress. And we need to change this, we need peace. The Marshall Plan was actually the result of a conglomeration of effort from different states to try and rebuild, especially Europe. In the immediate post-war years, the Labour government initiated a radical program of reforms which had a significant effect on British society in the following decades. Major industries and public utilities were nationalized, a welfare state was established, a system and a comprehensive publicly funded healthcare system, the National Health Service, was created. These were some of the features which was triggered as a result of the war, but also as a result of the government intervening in the economy. The UK Labour Party led that program, and to their credit, they created, for example, the National Health Service, which still exists to this day, and it is an example when we need to address issues of poverty, which actually are normally impact the majority of the population in society. People who are actually ordinary citizens, as opposed to people who are actually few, who are also the multi-billionaires. These are affected, but not really to the extent that the majority who are actually normal working classes are affected. Always, in crisis during capitalism or any other economic system, the government must intervene to strengthen the public sector. This was what the Labour Party did after the war. The rise of nationalism in the colonies coincided with Britain's now much diminished economic position, so that the policy of decolonization was unavoidable. So we talk about nationalism when nations come together to declare self-rule, such as happened in the colonies, and also as a result of the war. This led to freedom in places like Africa and other parts of the world, when Britain still holds sway over these nations during colonialism. So these are some of the impact of interventions in countries like Britain to grant independence to what was former colonies. So independence was granted to India and Pakistan in 1947. So India today, Indian Rishi Sunak is the Prime Minister of Britain, a son of the former colony. They used to be under the British. Now they are ruling Britain, which means we are very modern in our society. As a as a colony, as a former colony, India is now one of the leading countries in the world. And this is a good thing, because every country is now contributing to create wealth. Over the next 3 decades, most colonies of the British Empire gained their independence, with all those that sought independence supported by the UK during the transition period and afterwards. So independence expanded, and there were transitioning, and there were positivities following the war. These were the responsibilities of the state to try and tidy up the globe. Following the war, many became members of the Commonwealth of Nations. Commonwealth of Nations relate to Britain. Former colonies became members of Commonwealth. The problem with Commonwealth is that the wealth appears not to be very common. In Africa, there is still poverty. There is no evidence that British or the Western or the developed wealth are trickling down the global economy, including to trickle down into Africa. Although it is sufficient to say that there are classes of Africans who are now super millionaires, super multi-billionaires in US dollar, and it appears to me that the class system is now replacing other form of inequalities, or favoritism or discrimination, and therefore it is necessary under these circumstances for the super rich to design a system of actually helping people who cannot help themselves. And if this had happened today, tomorrow we will begin to see a rapid disappearance of crises which are actually unnecessary in the modern world. The crisis like the cost of living. We begin to see sign of affluence, sign of exercising of power. We saw, for example, the Concorde, which was actually a supersonic airliner, which reduced transatlantic flight from 8 hours to 3.5 hours. This is the aftermath of progress, developmentally, and world powers like Britain began to exercise their authority by building supersonic airliners like Concorde, which was so super fast reducing the transatlantic flight time from 8 hours to 3.5 hours. These were actually signs of the times at that time, and actually today this progress has continued along the front of the developmental economy. The UK was the third country to develop a nuclear weapon arsenal with its first atomic bomb test Operation Hurricane in 1952, but the new possible limits of Britain's international role were illustrated by the Suez Crisis Canal the Suez Crisis of 1956. Britain began to exercise its power militarily, participating in the creation of the atomic bomb, but also there were incidents which actually reveal weaknesses, such as the Suez Crisis in Africa. The international spread of the English language ensured the continuing international influence of its literature and culture. Like I said, we speak English today. I am African. We learn English in Africa. The French, who are actually culturally very influential in the modern world, they learn to speak English. The Chinese, who are actually culturally very robust, in supporting their Chinese culture, even they are also learning English. The American is an English-speaking country. The Canadian, the South American, the Australian, New Zealanders. English is the language of the globe, and that actually places the English country and Britain and the United Kingdom as the world leader, not only culturally but also economically, financially, and I hope culturally as well. When I talk of culture, I mean in terms of development, in terms of an economy. We need a cultural economy which is modern, modernized. We need to integrate values of culture into our modern developmental languages and aesthetics. So, what do we say? As a result of shortages of workers in the 1950s, the government encouraged immigration from Commonwealth countries. Today, we need to remember that after the war, Britain benefited from Africa, from other countries within the Commonwealth, India, to develop its wealth. So today, when we play games politically to use immigration as a political football in trying to win votes in countries like the UK or America, let us be careful to remember that that the world was built not just by the developed world but also the developing world, and the people in the developing world and in the developed world need leaders and the state which are actually culturally educated, which is prepared to integrate the new cultural economy into the new developmental economy. As long as we have money, wealth, power in the developmental front, we need to integrate the new knowledge of the new cultural economy and respecting people, valuing people, but people should now be a priority so that we do not suffer the impact of the cost of living crisis. We can then be in the position to eliminate this crisis, these events, within weeks, months, and not years. And this is possible. Most of the crises now impacting people like COVID-19, even the impact of Brexit. Brexit was actually a product of, rhetoric to do with immigration in Britain. That kind of rhetoric promoted by the extreme wing of the Conservative Party. Maybe also the right wing of other political parties. And this is not necessary. This is actually evidence of cultural failure, cultural backwardness, because we need foreigners in every country because they bring wealth of knowledge, of experience, of their culture, and most importantly, their labor, their work. They have worked so hard to build the wealth, which now is being owned by every multimillionaire. Every multimillionaire in the West and also in other parts of the world. So in the following decades, the UK became a more multi-ethnic society than before. So the multi-ethnicity did not come accidentally. It came as a result of the problems facing the economy and society of the West, who, especially Britain. That's why I'm talking about Britain, because what happened in Britain influenced America, influenced Europe, and influenced the rest of the developed world and the developing world. So Britain, like I said previously, is a very important country to look at. Despite rising living standards in the late 1950s and the 1960s, the UK's economic performance was less successful than many of its main competitors, such as France, West Germany, and Japan. So Britain was lagging behind. The rising standard in the rising living standard in the late 1950s, in 1960s, were there for us to experience, and we also look at the UK's economic performance. It was less successful than the success recorded with many of its competitors like France, Germany, West Germany, and Japan. These were actually events occurring to impact the economy and society, Britain and its allies. In the decade-long process of European integration, the UK was the founding member of the alliance called the Western European Union, established with the London and Paris Conference in 1954. So Britain again too played a leading role in the creation of what we now know as the European Union. The decades-long process of European integration took time. European integration took time, and now within the global economic perspective, the European Union is a leading power, in which Britain also is a leading power in Europe and across the globe. And we need to take this thing in perspective. As we move forward in the 1960s, the UK was one of the 7 founding members of the European Free Trade Association, EFTA, but in 1973 it left, joined the European Economic, the European Community, the EC. So this is also development of European integration, which Britain played a leading role. European Union today, the result of the European integration into one entity, the European entity is now the driver of globalization. And this is working well, it's succeeding in the face of Britain Brexiting. Brexiting of Britain simply means when Britain left Europe. And I'll provide a discussion with videos. If you watch the rest of my video on Brexit to try and make sense of what I was saying there, in the ensuing of this program is my intention to revisit these topics all over again. And this is the process going forward. Leave a comment below. Let me know what you're thinking in terms of these topics, and let us engage with it whether we enjoy it or not, because it's extremely important. It's actually at the center of our situation now with the cost of living. You speak to individuals, the cost of living now, with all its impact, is actually increasing. It is not only affecting our finances, also impacting our cultural well-being. People are actually depressed. People are unable to access healthcare because the waiting list is so long. And in housing, some people are actually waiting 14 years, 20 years for public housing. The government is simply incapable of delivering on public services, products and facilities like housing, healthcare, education. There is no reason why people who work for a living should fail to feed their children in school. And also the government should be able to help them with schools, but of course the government should pay school tuition fees, they should pay for the school uniform, they should pay for food and drink for children, and they should provide transport. This is not the case now happening. Parents have to provide transport, they have to bring their children to school, they have to pick them up using their car. This is a negligence by the state, and the state which doesn't understand the purpose of the public sector, because there should be school buses, going into every village. Actually, during rush hour, the only bus traveling should be school buses. In addition to, of course, public transport, all the other traffic should be probably suspended for a few hours, maybe 2, 3, 4 hours. And as soon as children are in school, as soon as people going to work are at work using public transport, then the rest of the world can start traveling. But that's another story for another day. In a 1975 referendum, 67% voted to stay in the European economic, in the European community, in the EC. When the EC became the European Union in 1992, the UK was one of the 12 founding members. So, like we saw in the other videos, the UK is a leading player in the European Union integration and is running, even when it exited in 2000. Recently, Britain still plays a leading role, and it will continue to do so. That is why it is correct to argue that Brexit was fake and it wasn't necessary, because Britain cannot leave Europe in substance, in any substantial way. I can't say he deceived the British people that he left Britain, Europe, but also the margin of voting. There were a lot of problems with the voting, and if it was not for bad politics in Britain would not have Brexit. Politicians should have united between the Labour Party, the Labour Democrat, SNP, and the Conservative Party to plead with the British people to allow Britain to remain. And I think Britain should rejoin the European Union, because it is actually, Britain is making a fool of itself. No country in Europe who is a member of the European Union should leave. When the Treaty of Lisbon, signed in 2007, forms the constitutional basis of the European Union since then. So remember, Lisbon Treaty, which was signed in 2007, is fundamental constitutional in the formulation of the European Union. The European Union, like I said, is actually the driver of globalization. As no country in the globe is more powerful than the European Union in terms of globalization, in terms of military power. Even America, even China is now a servant of Europe because of the European Union. There is set to replace any power in the world, in not just driving the globe, but also reshaping Europe. And Britain is actually at the heart of this, whether it is in or out. It is an inevitability that Britain will be a deciding factor in the European Union, and the European Union is going to be a deciding factor in the globe. For the late 1960s, Northern Ireland suffered communal and paramilitary violence, sometimes affecting the other parts of the UK are conventionally known as the Troubles. You remember in the 1960s, as recently as the 1980s and even the 90s, there was something called terrorism in Northern Ireland. We now seem to be forgetting this. So these are actually incidences. These are actually segments of events. Most of them are actually crises which underpin the development and the creation of what is now the United Kingdom, being the greatest, if not one of the, in practice, actually the greatest power of Earth. So it is usually considered to have ended with the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, which occurred in 1998. So when government intervened in crisis such as seen in Northern Ireland, then change happened, such as it did, because relatively the idea of fear, the incident of fear of terrorism in Britain has subsided from Northern Ireland, because leaders decide to do the right thing to intervene to resolve that problem. They can do that effectively now to resolve the crisis on the cost of living. That's what I'm trying to say. So we talk about leaders of the European Union state in 2007. we'll talk about the UK entering the EEC in 1973, which later became the European Union in 2016. The UK voted to leave the EU as a member state. We have spoken about that, and we will be speaking about that over and over. And I hope you enjoy yourself. Please subscribe to this channel if you're still watching. Share with family and friends, and leave a comment below. Click like, click notification bell so that you don't miss on any of our videos. Following a period of widespread economic slowdown and industrial strife in the 1970s, the conservative government of the 1980s under Margaret Thatcher initiated a radical policy of monetarism, deregulation, particularly of the financial sector. For example, the Big Bang in 1986, and labor markets, the sale of state-owned companies, privatization, and the withdrawal of the subsidies to others. This was wrong. Under Margaret Thatcher, this was the beginning of the sowing of the seed of a cultural failure in Britain and across the globe. Remember, I said if Britain sneezes, Europe catches the cold. So it caught a cold of bad policy to do with capitalism, and it was actually a disaster for Britain, and it continued to be a bad example for the globe, including America, because what Margaret Thatcher's the rotten seed she showed about ideologically driven and poorly thought through policy of privatization. I don't know the kind of wild animals who were advising Margaret Thatcher at that time, and many people, commentators, said she didn't listen to our advisors. I don't know the kind of wild animals, wild beast monsters who really motivated this Margaret Thatcher, former British Prime Minister, to privatize the public sector. Public sector should never be privatized. And so a good government replacing Rishi Sunak or any conservative or any Labour Party. I mean, privatization or nationalization is not a given of any one political party. Even the Conservative Party now, under Rishi Sunak, they can start nationalizing the public sector, so that a government such as the current Conservative government, would be able to eradicate, to address more effectively the cost of living. But it is sufficient to say also now that privatization in Britain alone is not going to change anything. Britain cannot do that. Britain needs to negotiate with the European Union, America, and the rest of the globe to renationalize the public sector, because that is how to produce a sensible aspect of public service, which is intended to reduce the violence produced, the social economic violence produced by capitalism. In 1982, Argentina invaded the British territories of South Georgia and the Falklands Islands. So this led to war between Britain and Falkland. The occupation provoked a military response from the United Kingdom, leading to the Falklands War, which lasted for 10 weeks. Many people died. That war was not necessary if Britain and Argentina were culturally educated enough. Any war such as now we see in Russia and Ukraine is the product of lunacy. You talk to people, you don't just go around fighting. That's my criticism of modern state, which actually, modern leaders are actually behaving like idiots on really terrible drugs, like some really toxic drug addicts, and this is because of their poor education in terms of cultural economy. And I'm actually suggesting this will change. There need to be a remaking of the state infrastructure, government infrastructure, administrative infrastructure, leadership and management infrastructure across the globe. And every leader, everyone with power, should be re-educated culturally to value humanity as a matter of priority in theory in principle and also in practice. And that's why there's the cost of living. That's why I'm speaking. My appeal is that we need change. The inhabitants of the island are predominantly descendants of British settlers and strongly favor British sovereignty, as shown by 2013 referendum. The referendum was done in 2013 in Falkland, and information saying the majority actually British settlers, which is a good thing. Britain can settle wherever they want, but the Argentine government should be respectful of the British people who are living in Argentina, and the British people should be respectful of the people of Argentina. And therefore, the two governments should have actually sat down and resolved this matter amicably and not resorting to war. Because people die. If you value people, you don't do things to kill people. That's wrong. From 1984, the UK economy was helped by the inflow of substantial North Sea oil revenue. So oil is in the North Sea in Britain. So that oil should be used to manage the cost of living. And that is a public sector policy. It's not a private sector policy. So it's being used, the government should intervene to pump more oil. The government should intervene to nationalize the energy companies. These companies should be in the hands of the public. The companies producing energy and food should never be privatized. Companies providing healthcare, education, public transport should never ever be privatized. They should be renationalized. Globally, the only way to solve this problem, foreign offices and head of states, every diplomat should focus on renationalizing public sector. Reverse, rewrite the history of public sector economy, because that's the only way to bring social justice. Is the beginning of learning the new cultural economy, to integrate it as part of the modern progress, including the new global economy. We need to do this as a matter of priority. And thank you for watching this video. The statutory incorporation followed acceptance of the European Convention on Human Rights. So human rights is extremely important, but we cannot implement human rights without improve cultural education, because we need to value humanity over and above any other concern. Then we begin to talk of human rights. We can set laws such as the incorporating statutorily and also the acceptance, the European Convention on Human Rights. The statutory incorporation followed what are we saying? Hang on a second. Sorry about that. So about the end of the 20th century, there were major changes to the governance of the UK with the establishment of the devolved administration for Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. The idea of devolution assumed the improving of society within the social sector, within the developmental sector, which occurred. We succeeded in developing wealth locally, nationally. The argument was to actually promote social justice, redistribution, rebalancing of the intensity of wealth as between England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And also, this was actually consistent of the European Convention on Human Rights, which was statutorily incorporated following acceptance of the European Convention on Human Rights. The UK remained a great power with global diplomatic and military influence and a leading role in the United Nations and NATO. Thank you for watching this video. As we continue to reflect, please subscribe to my channel and share with family and friends. click the notification bell and leave a comment, click like. Thank you. See you in the next one. Bye.